Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. And with most of the votes counted, the ruling pro-European Party of Action and Solidarity has won Sunday's parliamentary elections in Moldova. But ahead of the polls, mounting evidence show how Russia is exploiting religious networks, particularly the Orthodox clergy, to sway political outcomes. Funded pilgrimages, covert payments, and coordinated messaging suggest a deliberate effort to turn spiritual influence into geopolitical leverage. Joining us today on TVP World is Rasmus Nilsson, a lecturer in Slavic and Eastern European Studies from University College London. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into the attempted manipulation by Russia, I'd like to take a look at the electoral results because the pro-European party has won quite decisively. What does that say about the country's political direction?
I think it says something quite positive certainly from my point of view. It shows that Moldovans do believe that PAS and the European direction, so to speak, still bears promise. It shows that the average Moldovan still believes that there is a useful path for them to go towards Europe, and that's highly encouraging.
All right, and my question also is how much does the President Maia Sandu have to play when it comes to this electoral victory?
Well, I mean, she certainly can show you're in a country which has significant and has had throughout its post-Soviet existence significant socioeconomic difficulties. So the fact that she can now come in, I mean, she was re-elected. Now there is a effectively re-election for her government as well. That shows to me and should make her able to show to Moldovans and to the world that she's worth betting on. That she in effect has steadied the ship. We've got to remember that for a number of years, Moldovan politics was highly, I think chaotic is fair to say, with very different voting coalitions, very different people in power, people who were not particularly able to move the country forward. And she certainly, with this result, she and her government can certainly show that they are taking Moldova forward.
Right, like I mentioned, there's always been a quite chaotic element within Moldovan's politics. And ahead of the election, President also been talking a lot extensively about potential Russian influence as well. But looking at the results with a relatively decisive win for the actual Party of Action and Solidarity, would you say that Russia's influence within Moldova is either waning or is no longer as relevant as perhaps perceived to be in the beginning?
Possibly. I mean, the result coming up now might also show that the Moldovan authorities have become better at countering Russian disinformation and Russian sabotage compared to the previous election. Having said that, I think it's also worth for your viewers to go out and have a look at local results within this election. So what are the results in specific election districts? And I would, for instance, point out that if you look at the data from the Electoral Commission in Moldova, and you try to compare, say, data for Transnistria, which we often hear about as a Russian exclave with Russian troops and so on, but try to compare data from, say, Transnistria with data from Gagauzia in the south, Gagauzia being another region in Moldova where we've heard a lot about Russian influence. Now, in Gagauzia in the south, it looks as if the opposition, the Russia-friendly opposition, has won a significant victory. I mean, PAS, the governing party, gets something like 3%, according to current figures. If you're looking at, say, Transnistria, another place where Russia is supposed to have influence, yes, PAS still loses, but they get about 30% of the vote. So there does seem still to be pockets in Moldova, and particularly Gagauzia, where Russian influence stands very strong.
Right, with these Russian influence as well as pro-Russian sentiment, can you help us understand what contributed to the electoral loss of the coalition involving the pro-Russian Socialist and Communist Party as well as the Patriotic Electoral Bloc, which total only took less than 25% of the votes?
Well, if I could be a bit blunt, the people the people at the head of the opposition are yesterday's people like Igor Dodon, for instance, people who had their chance already, and this time around, as far as I could see from the electoral campaign, could offer nothing new. I mean, there was no particular electoral program from those people, apart from saying that they were against the sitting government, they were against going into a certain kind of Europe, be that a socially permissible Europe, be that a Europe that wanted to allegedly exploit Moldova, so on and so forth. So they could say something about what they were against. They couldn't really say what they were for. And again, someone like Igor Dodon, for instance, has had plenty of time before. I mean, he's been president before, he's been in Moldovan politics for a long time. He's had plenty of time to show Moldovans what he could offer. And it turns out he can offer relatively little, and Moldovans seem to have called him out on that.
All right, I'm also curious about the polarization prior to the election, because both parties have been pointing at each other, saying that there might be unrest as a result of the election. But with the victory kind of being a little bit, the gap being a little bit wider than a lot of people have anticipated, do you still see that momentum, these protests? Do you think that these movements on the street is still going to be as heated, or can we see more of these unrest that was purportedly supposed to happen?
It's a very good question. I think we have to distinguish a bit between the political scene and the social scene. So in the political scene, I noticed that Igor Dodon has already called for protests on the streets, which shows him, I would argue, as a not very responsible politician. But that's the political side of it. If you're looking at the social side of it, and this has been the case in Moldova for many years, arguably throughout, again, the last few decades, ordinary Moldovans are trying, when they protest, if they are dissatisfied with the government, they are so because they feel that socioeconomic wealth, that equality is not being spread around society, is not being spread around across Moldovan society. Now, if PAS can show that they can spread funds from the EU and spread increasing welfare across society, then I do not envisage particular protests with, a clear social backing, clear social roots within Moldova. And then what you will have are specific parties, for instance, the opposition parties here, who either have their hardcore supporters or possibly people they pay to come out and protest. But that is not a danger in itself to Moldovan state stability.
All right. I'm also curious, do you think this election result makes it safe to say that Russia has effectively lost its political hold on Moldova?
I think, yeah, you can say that, but I think that probably happened a while back. Again, just to stress the point, if PAS and the EU could show on the ground for Moldovans that things were getting better, or to the extent they can do that, Russia doesn't really have a counter to it. It doesn't have an answer that can go against that. I think you can go back some years to see when Russia started losing influence. Even in a place like Transnistria, for instance, which again has Russian troops on the ground, which again has historically been seen as the hotbed of Russian influence. Well, even in Transnistria, you go back to the late 2010, so almost 10 years ago, and you could already start seeing local elites in Transnistria moving away from Russia because they could see that simply wasn't in their economic interest, and started moving closer to business in Moldova proper, but also in, say, Romania and the EU. So the waning Russian influence has taken place for many years, and this is the latest sign of it.
Right. Another attempt we see the Russians trying to apply is the utilization of the Orthodox Church to promote its geopolitical agenda. How effective has that been in this round of election? And do you think it's as impactful as they wish it to be?
Well, clearly not. Clearly, it wasn't as effective because you have a quite clear victory for the sitting government and for the EU cause. Of course, the church matters in Moldova. Of course, you do have people who are highly religious, but it's not the main factor within Moldovan society or within Moldovan opinion making, public opinion making. So the Russians went in and tried to influence Moldovan society through the church, but they've also done so through various types of media, through informal contacts, through people from Moldova working with or within Russia, so on and so forth, or at least historically doing so. The church in itself, it's got a certain electorate within Moldova, as it will have many places, a certain demographic of, let's say, very frequently elderly people within Moldova, and there may well have been a minor influence from Russian propaganda now, but it clearly did not work as well as it should have. It is even possible, I would just float this option for your viewers, it is even possible that people from Russia, within the Russian state, trying to work with the Moldovan church to influence this election, that those people within Russia may have overstated their impact in Moldova in order to get more funds from the Russian state coffers. At the end of the day, it looks as if this kind of propaganda did not have any decisive impact.
So in your assessment, would you say this lack of effectiveness has more to do with the fact that Moldova has become a less religious society, or is it that they are able to separate their religious belief from the Russian influence and their stated propaganda?
Well, there's a bit of both, but I think the overarching explanation is that the average Moldovan cares about his or her daily life, cares about his or her welfare or lack thereof. This remains a very poor country with significant disparities in wealth, not least outside the capital. And the average Moldovan simply wants to live better, simply wants sort of bread on the table and so on. The church matters certainly, identity matters certainly, but this was first and foremost, as has been the case before, this was first and foremost a vote about living standards in Moldova. And so far, it looks as if tentatively the Moldovan voters are looking at the PAS government and saying, we still trust you, we still trust the EU to make our lives better. That's the overarching takeaway from the election.
All right, so what are the risks for some of the countries that still has a stronger kind of religious hold when it comes to their political decision making?
Well, it's a very good question, and I'm finding myself a bit conflicted here because I'm someone who, as a scholar, believe a lot in the influence of identity, and it does matter. But if you're looking at a lot of the countries that we generally present as vulnerable to Russian influence, could be Moldova, could also be certain countries in the Western Balkans, for instance, then we are often looking at quite poor and quite unequal countries. What people need in these countries is hope. What people need in these countries is a sense that their country, that their society is worth betting on. Now, in order for them to believe this, in order for your average, let's say, Moldovan person, your average Serb, or whatever it may be, your average person in, say, Georgia in the South Caucasus, so on and so forth, in order for them to believe that their country is worth betting on, they have to see a plan going forward. Now, that plan can have to do with identity. It can have to do with developing the place of the nation in the world. But it very frequently, and I would argue probably more frequently, has to do with people seeing a stable society, seeing a more equitable society again, and a society that is respected, that does not just become a supplicant to, say, the West, but is actually able to go out and influence the world as well as having reasonable living standards at home. That sort of hope is crucial for people to believe in and to support their sitting governments. Now, Russia has again and again showed itself unable to offer such hope to people around the world, be that through identity measures, be that through welfare measures or lack thereof, so on and so forth. And it's now for the EU and governments aligned with the EU to show that they can offer this hope. That's the common denominator across these vulnerable countries.
Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.